Ready.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next webinar on social VR platforms. So we started this series basically to help people look at alternative options for virtual collaboration, online conferences, and remote working. We've seen a lot of interest generated in the industry and outside of people exploring these platforms. And we just wanted to create a space where we could have users of these platforms come and explain how they work and have a little discussion about kind of their benefits and limitations. And so if you have any questions, just pop them in the Q&A. We'll get to them at the end. I am joined here today by Daniel DeBossi Bryant, who is the co-founder of Educators in VR, Tony Milliken, who is the director of immersive learning and emerging technologies at Air University, Rosie Collins, the founder of the Fred Company, and Michael Barngrover, who is the coordinator of Karma Labs at Koç University in Istanbul. So thank you guys so much for joining. I'm going to start off with hand over to Daniel so you can do your presentation. I will go through all 4 presentations about the platforms and then go to a discussion and Q&A.
Okay, over to me.
Yeah, go for it.
Wonderful. So I'm going to venture to give you a bit of a taste of the Rumii platform. I see Machacone in the crowd here. Shout out to Tony. I'm going to just start this up and then share my screen, give you a very quick taste. Reset this very quickly. As always, a little bit of a roundabout. Okay. Sorry for this. I had it running earlier, and now, here we go. Right, I need to restart that. Sorry.
Should we go with Tony first while you set it up, Daniel?
Give me 1 second. One second. I think I'll be there just now. Should be all right. Thank you for your patience.
I'm going to do a live VR demo on Zoom.
Yeah, all right. Okay, here we go. This looks better. Okay, we're good. So I'm going to share my screen very briefly with you. And then you will hopefully share that. Okay, here we go. So find the reference point. This is, can you see me and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Great.
All right. So this is the opening interface. I've got my avatar here, redeem a code, join a room. I won't talk you through all the options, but I'm going to join a room and I'm going to choose this dome scenario that I've set up. Brings me into a nice Unity build. What I like about Rumii is the interface is one of the most intuitive ones I've seen. And it's really developed not as a social VR platform, but as a collaboration and education VR platform, and it does that really well. So you can see here in the space, I'll just give you a brief overview of this dome space without trying to give you nausea. See, there's a platform in the middle, a nice dome shape. And then for teaching and collaborating, you have this tool. You have a whiteboard. You can draw on the whiteboard. You can bring up a second board with all the functions here. You can share your screen, which I'll try and do quickly. Okay, and then you can see this sharing your screen.
So
it's
meta.
a nice little effect there, yeah. Then you've got photo viewer. I haven't got any photos loaded to my laptop, but that does what you would expect it to do. Same with PDF. Model viewer, I haven't got any 3D assets to show yet, but you can bring in external models quite easily. There's a good pipeline for that. Audio player, music, video player. I'm going to show you Google Poly quickly because this is quite neat. So they have connected Rumii with Google Poly. So if I click fish tank, this 3D model will pop up. You sometimes have to find it somewhere. There it is. Okay, so if I jump over here, now I'm looking at this and I can grab it. I can pick it up, I can move it, and I can scale it. And I can pass it to other people, which is quite nice. And then if I wanted to write something, I could close this, bring up the 3D drawer, and in different colors, I could write Immerse UK. There you go. It's 3D, and then you can undo it and so on. Not a problem.
It's almost like Tilt Brush
Yeah, it is.
in
It's a
Rumi.
very, very nice functionality in here. You can
Very cool.
allow your attendees to use that as well. So then you also have that was the line draw building block, so you can build stuff, YouTube, and live video streamer. I like this as well. I'll show you quickly what that looks like. When it comes on, when it should come on, this will be streaming should be streaming my laptop, but maybe because I've got Google Live happening, then sharing screen pause. Right, that actually shares your webcam, which is quite handy. So here you can see the environment a little bit more, and it operates 10, 15, 20, and more people quite solidly. Really good space. They have 12 different scenarios. I'll leave it there for now. But one thing I do want to say about Rumii is that while they're not a social VR platform, and when you log in, sometimes it looks like it's empty. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. There are some big companies with big teams using Rumii every week of the year. So when I log in, unless you've got a team associated, you might end up finding yourself there by yourself. But there's a lot to do and explore. I'll very quickly show you a very useful platform. So I'm going to exit from that. I'm going to go to Rooms, and one space I like is this Educators in VR Sandbox, which is essentially just an open space. You see it in a minute what I mean. Yeah, so it's just a wide open plain, couple of mountains in the background, and you can build to your heart's content. And it's amazing how much you can fit in here. So from my perspective, I'm an educator bringing students in here, bringing different models, allowing them to bring models in. It's a very powerful platform. I like it a lot. Okay, I'll leave it there.
I just have one quick question for you, Daniel.
Yes,
And
please.
how much did you use it for Educators in VR Summit and the Student Summit?
We were very lucky. Matt Chacon and his team, they worked very closely with us, and we had, I would like to say 8 sessions there, a variety of sessions. I think Matt Chacon and his team did 2 or 3, and then we had a couple of guest speakers who like the platform, use it a lot. Looking back, I think we could have done more. The summit in February was a bit of seat of the pants sometimes, but I'm glad we did incorporate Rumii because it's ready, it's solid. I mean, there's a lot of new platforms coming now, and you know, as it should, but Rumi's been doing good work for a while, and yeah, really excited to work with them. Okay,
Great.
I'll stop sharing now. Go on.
Perfect. And now we're going to move on to Tony, who actually has been using Rumii for quite a long time at your university. So you want to tell us a bit about that experience, Tony?
Yes, in fact. Yeah, Tony Milliken, and active duty Air Force officer. I teach at the Air University. And the course that we've been teaching for the past 2 years is called AR, VR, and related technologies applied to practice. So our students are like mid-career officers in their late 20s, 30s, early 40s who are from multiple different career fields. We've had almost 40 different specialties represented in our course. And the concept behind the course is to introduce these students because, 99% of the people out there are very, very new, if even related at all to VR. So we teach these students how to understand the tools that are brought along by immersive technologies and how they can be applied in their own specialty to teach the people in their communities. And multi-user VR has turned out to be a game changer for what we're trying to do. And it's for the students who leave our course and go on in their communities, multi-user VR has become just an incredible tool for them. And why though? Why multi-user VR? Why not just sit and look at a square box on a flat screen like we're doing right now? Well, the essence of it is all the way back to Socrates. It was known that we're social creatures and we learn best in a social environment using our senses. And whereas we have like maybe 2 degrees of our field of view right here on a screen, when you're in VR, you've got 360 degrees by 360 degrees. So the brain gets used that much more intensely because there are places in the brain that light up through fMRI data. You can see with an EEG on your head that when you're in an immersive world, there are more pieces of your brain are being used. And so we want to capitalize on that as educators because we know the more of a person's brain that gets used in the learning process, the deeper and longer lasting that learning is. So a great case example of a project that sprung out of our course is called Pilot Training Next. Pilot Training Next out in San Antonio, Texas, was a pilot project to teach pilots, aviators, double entendre there. But the program actually proved that we could take what has always been ever since the 60s, it's taken 13 months to produce a military pilot who's regularly go forward and fly the airframe that he or she would fly. We proved that can be done in 6 months with the use of immersive virtual reality. Each student has their own immersive VR experience to practice flying all the procedures in the plane, 6 months versus 13 months. An incredible, phenomenal result there. So the idea is for us, the Air Force, to replicate that process within all of the communities we have. And we have professionals we have lawyers, we have chaplains, we have security, we have maintenance, supply chain, all throughout. If you can imagine soup to nuts of industry, most of those occupations will be represented in the service. So back to the multi-user, one of the pieces that we presented to the students is that there's multiple different multi-user VR platforms available, and each one has their own different flavors, own different things. Some have great avatar generators, others a little more cartoonish, and some bring capabilities like Daniel was just demonstrating of being able to do things in the multi-user environment. So Rumii ended up being one of the ones that we gravitated toward. As you can see in the background here, this is a shot of our students inside multi-user VR from 18 different locations around the country, around the US. And actually one was from Japan. One of our students was logging in from Japan. It happened to be like 2 or 3 a.m. for him. But and then also in this picture is Matt Chacon, who Daniel mentioned earlier, who's the CEO of the company that runs Rumii. And we were introducing Matt to all of our class to let him know, hey, this is a product that we've used in the educational arena. Each one of our students is writing their master's thesis on application of VR into training within their communities. And we found Rumii to be a really good tool because of the multi-user aspect. And Matt was a little bit excited about the fact that here's a group of graduate students from professions all across the DoD using the tool that they have, and we're quite excited about it. This is our second year of teaching it. Another group of people who are going to go forward in their communities throughout DoD, and of course international too. We have a student from Honduras, a student from Chile. Last year we had Canada and a couple other countries, and so yeah, this is where we are. Multi-user virtual reality. It's a huge impact for the world of learning.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Tony. So now we're going to have Rosie. We're going to go on to Altspace and have 2 presentations from Rosie and Michael on that. And then we're going to go back to kind of discussing both the platforms. Go for it, Rosie.
Thanks, Esha. So we're probably slightly differently positioned from these guys. I think we're a production company as well as a sort of research studio. And so I'm kind of a lot newer probably to using social VR because it hasn't been part of our day-to-day work. And obviously with the current situation, the first few weeks of lockdown, we were just, exploring VR in all of its different aspects and seeing what we could, what new things we might be able to do with it as well, because obviously all our in-person workshops and things that we would previously have done immediately were cancelled. So we ended up playing primarily with Altspace, and we've also been looking at hubs quite a bit. Our work's really focused on accessibility and trying to use web VR as a way that as many people as possible can come into it. So while we've all got HMDs, and we were talking with Michael earlier, people in my immediate network tend to have headsets. A lot of people don't. So it's why I'm excited about web VR, the ability of people, even with that headset, to come in through a desktop and still get quite an interesting experience out of it. And I think what all of the stuff we've taken from our research we've been doing recently about Zoom calls, why it's exhausting and quite often a really horrible experience. You know, it's so counterintuitive to your entire lifetime's learning about how to communicate. You know, we've lost all of the subtleties of body language and eye contact and all of those natural things. So on top of everything else that's going on in the world, now we're faced with a whole new way of trying to communicate with people. And I've got, you know, 5 people staring at me, which in like primate behavior or all animals is so aggressive. And I think what I love about VR is just, it seems like it's this kind of more adventurous approach to things, but actually it's by far the most natural way of all of the different things that we've explored. Like Tony was saying, you know, it's definitely the ability to look around and to not be focused on an individual person, and then also having not even outside of your peripheral vision, every single person staring at you. In VR, you're just suddenly back to a much more natural way of talking. It doesn't feel rude to look away and draw something or shoot some fireworks in the air or something. That's just totally fine. You know, it's kind of a given in that world. So we've done a little video which we put together for some clients at the start of lockdown to just try and explain a little bit about what we were playing around with in Altspace and some of the benefits that we've kind of noticed to using that. So I'm going to try and share my screen now. So it's about a 2-minute little video, and excuse the bad joke that will appear at some point in here. All right.
Hi, I'm Rosie. I'm the creative director at Fred. This is Charlotte, who's our in-house cognitive neuroscientist. Hey! And we've been spending a ton of time in virtual reality in all sorts of different ways, but particularly the social VR spaces. So we're in one today, which is called Alt VR. We've been actually creating work in here, and we've been socializing with our colleagues around the UK and around the world. So we thought this might be quite a fun time to do a little video, take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the things that we've been up to in virtual reality over the last few weeks. So this is one of the pre-designed spaces in Altspace that we're actually using right now to do real work. As you see, we've customized it slightly so that we've got Alfred branding in, and this is a place where we've been recording a virtual reality podcast with some very exciting guests. Charlotte's here getting ready to do a bit of a presentation to show off some of the findings from a study we did last year on using virtual reality as a relaxation tool.
And I've even got a laser pointer to highlight our lovely statistics.
So as well as doing actually some quite serious work using virtual reality spaces like this, I think it's very important for me to be able to share my humour with the world as well. So I like to get up on a stage, take up a picture of my dog Fred, who the company's named after, and well, let me show you an example now. What was Whitney Houston's favourite sort of coordination?
I don't know.
All those other spaces are fantastic. Obviously, we're in virtual reality. We don't have to just replicate the real world. So sometimes we like to just hang out on Mars. Obviously, this isn't one of our own images. This is the Mars rover. Bit of a different environment to have a hangout on. But if you get a bit homesick, we can always hop back down to Earth. There's a super quick overview of a few of the things that we're doing in social VR at the moment. But by far the best thing is to come and meet us in here. So send us a message, come and hang out with us. We've got a VR headset. You can get this full immersive experience. You can feel like you're sitting in the hot tub. If you've got a desktop PC or even a mobile phone, there's different platforms that we can access even without a VR headset and still have a brilliant time. So send us a message, come hang out and have a drink in a hot tub in New York while you're stuck in lockdown. Bye!
Bye.
Thank you, Rosie. That is so great. It's such a great example of, you know, like early explorations of these platforms. It's so good. Loved it. So now we're going to have Michael do his presentation on Altspace and what he's been using it for, and then we'll go to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Asha. So kind of like Rosie, actually, most of the work that I've done recently with Altspace has been on the content creation side of a YouTube show that I do with a frequent collaborator by the name of Lance Powell Jr. So that show, you know, I'll just show a little video of it because in that one, is coming from a first-person perspective, which is typical if you want to document a lot of these social VR platforms. In Rose's case, some of it, I guess, was first-person, but in others, there was maybe another camera or another person there because you saw the two people on stage. And what it highlights is that, you know, these platforms have been developing over several years, and they've kind of pivoted at different times to adapt to demand or opportunities that came up. But in many cases, they have pivoted towards something like events or meetings or classrooms. But they did it not necessarily with a close working association with you know, experienced users of that use case. And so things like camera controls are lacking in a lot of platforms, and Altspace is one of them. So I'll just show, this will be running kind of in the background, just because it's not something that requires a whole lot of explanation. But so Altspace, you'll notice, is kind of falling in this line between something like Engage and something like Rec Room in terms of the realism of the avatars and the environment. It's quite low poly in style. There's lip syncing, which is a nice feature because otherwise there's no other type of expression. And so when we're doing when we're doing a show or we're doing an event, sometimes we get the feedback that it's almost a little boring to watch someone with no or very limited facial expressions speaking for a long period of time. So what Altspace is interesting in, so here we're doing a show, and it's called VR Spatial. You can see it on YouTube if you are excited to see the nonsense that we end up getting into. But of all the platforms, Altspace, for my money, has the most active agenda. I mean, the content is growing so fast, particularly now, but even before. I don't think any other presentation platform or social VR platform or whatever had as much content. So, and it's almost always live events. And the live events are important, I think. One, because that's the real purpose of VR. Like, we often get into this debate about having like static presentations, and some platforms like Engage have spatial recording, which is a tremendous value proposition. But at the same time, watching a recording of something doesn't necessarily convey the same experience as seeing it done live. And so Altspace is a much better platform for live performances or live presentations than here I'm looking to see what's under this rabbit, because I'm looking for a hidden Easter egg. This was an Easter event that we organized. There's nobody here, but there were people here before. So in addition to doing this show, I'm also a researcher of collaboration in shared virtual spaces, and I organize a series of events called Zero Events for the XR crowd, which is these are the main contexts in which I'm using Altspace. So I'm often looking at the UI, I'm looking at the functionalities, and Altspace is this great platform, as I said, for live events, but when you want to do presentations, my thought on it is that it's what we call, it has a very high friction. It is not easy or intuitive to present a PDF or a PowerPoint presentation. You can do it. And in fact, there's a lot of support. In fact, there's probably more active support on this platform than any other platform. If you go to this platform right now, you're almost guaranteed to meet someone working for the platform, which doesn't normally happen on other platforms anymore. In the old days, that was the way it was, but Altspace still has a very active support community, but that's also because it's necessary. The UI and the controls, you have to use something called like slides.com. You don't have to, but it's strongly encouraged that you use third-party platforms in order to deliver your content effectively. And they also assume that if you're giving a presentation, you're not actually going to control the slides yourself, which for me is quite unintuitive, counterintuitive. So, for example, they direct you to the instructions on how to load up a PowerPoint, which is great, pretty straightforward. And it's not that long a presentation, a guide. But if you want to do what they call advanced meetings, which is what we would understand as actually delivering a presentation, we have this other page, which is far longer and far more detailed. And now we get into actually doing it in Altspace. Prior to that was the third-party platform that you wanted to work with. And again, it's not to say you can't learn this and become quite good at it. And there are people who do this a lot, but it clearly, compared to something like Rumii or Meet in VR or some of these other platforms that are designed around these types of presentations, Altspace is just not a great thing for that, despite the fact that so many people do presentations in it. So I'm actually would be in the Q&A very excited to hear Daniel's experience working with it, because it might be different or it might be confirming. But
yeah, didn't you say it was like a 2 or 3 page PDF on how to do a presentation?
Well, if you converted that website into like a document or something,
okay.
Scrolling it down like that, it's it's maybe I'm not the smartest guy in the room. It took me a while actually to get my presentation loaded where I could in VR control it. And one of the things that they expect you to do is to have a support team. Which, what I mean when I said before, it's kind of counterintuitive, is that the thinking is when I go digital, I'm expecting to need less resources.
Yeah.
But in this specific example, it's much better if you have more resources than you might in a real world environment. So
I think we're kind of a ways to go even with all the UI of this stuff and UX, because people already have the difficulty putting on the headset and understanding how that works first, and then to have to go through all of the details of how to understand using a platform, it's too many barriers still. It feels a bit too a bit too much. What do you guys think, Tony and Daniel, about that for Rumii? Do you feel like it's more intuitive to use from start, like for a first time user, for example?
I think Rumii is pretty intuitive, menu generated for what its purpose is. And you still have the advantage with one like Altspace where there's more users out there, but it depends on if you want a specific group that you're going to do a specific activity with. You may want to lean toward a Rumii, whereas if you want to reach a mass population of people that aren't really doing professional collaboration, you may want to go toward an Altspace. So it's just like, to me, I love the fact that there is an array of options, a variety of options, because more options means to the user, more specific use cases where they can go to a platform and find what they're looking for.
And as an educator, Daniel, you made a comment earlier about Rumii being something that was really important for you to use, like it was a good tool.
Yeah. One of the things I'm trying to develop more now is really max out the possible interactions of VR. So in Altspace, getting a presentation up, it can be done. There's a workflow that after you've done it a couple of times, it becomes much less of a hassle. But I miss being able to bring 3D models in. For me, VR without the ability to bring in 3D models and share them is great for having communities and meetings and presentations, but it's not the kind of immersive, interactive education I want to give to my students.
Yeah. I have a question about that very specifically. The model viewer, I think it was, where you bring in your own 3D assets.
Yeah.
So recently we did a spatial design event in a VR platform called Engage with HTC, and I had really wanted to bring in models, and I thought, we're doing a spatial design event. This is what it's for. Like, this is what we should be showing. And in the end, it ended up being you had to optimize the model or something like that. It needed to go to the team there to make it good enough quality for it to show.
Now.
And I was just wondering, like, what's it like on Rumii? Like, can you just drag and drop it in? Like, do you have to optimize it? How difficult is it to do that?
So Google Poly is plugged in, which means it's there. Well, there's a number of models available there. You can bring them in. And then to bring in assets, say from Sketchfab, which is another repository where you can either buy or download free 3D models. There's a bit of a workflow. Again, once you've done it once or twice, It doesn't take that much, but the affordance it gives you is well worth sitting down to figure it out. Because what happens by the end of it is you can, again, you have to watch out how big a model you bring into the space. That's with, as far as I know, every platform. But being able to bring in like photogrammetric, photorealistic objects, or just if you're teaching beekeeping and you can bring a beehive in and bees, you know, immediately it's a different experience. And with Engage, I know that they will, that's in development for Engage, that you can have your own pipeline for bringing in models, much like in Rumii as well.
Okay. But you find the quality really good for that. Do you use that as well, Tony, the 3D assets?
Well,
in your...
I just wanted to throw up an analogy to put things into the grand scheme perspective of where we are in the life cycle or the technology cycle of VR. Looking back to 1903, when the Wright brothers first invented the flying machine. It wasn't called the airplane at the time, the flying machine. And if you look just 3 to 4 years later, 1906, 1907, we weren't flying hypersonic jets yet, right? And so we're just a few years, 3 to 4 years into consumer grade virtual reality. And so to anticipate that some of the friction is going to still be there, I remember when the PC first started happening and everybody had to use MS-DOS to do anything. It was a huge challenge to get people on board, the masses of people on board. It really was, geeks like myself who were doing it. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, to me, and I talk about it to the class, we call it the technology tax. Technology tax, in as much as, just like with real life and real taxes, the further advanced you get, the more tax you're going to have to pay, right? So we're kind of leading the edge. We're the ones who are taking this platform and adapting it to what we want to do. So we can anticipate there's going to be a degree of friction, a degree of, learning things that may get better as a user interface as time goes along. But honestly, that makes me excited to be in the VR space right now, that there is, it still is a time that there's a little bit of friction and everything's not, iPhone friendly, just, one click and you're there.
And we get to see it evolve, which is so exciting. Like Michael, you were saying earlier that you've used these platforms for years and you were on Rumii like 2-3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. It was one of the first things I liked. And so this was just an aside we were talking about. I was just a couple days ago, before being contacted about this webinar, that I haven't heard Rumii brought up in a while. And I think, it's because North America is really a different world in VR. I mean, Sansar and high fidelity, for example, that's what everybody talks about over there. Spatial, everyone talks about it. Whereas these things don't get a lot of as much discussion in Europe. And I thought 2.5 years ago, Rumii had an incredible design compared to Engage. Clearly different, like very distinct use cases that they were targeting. And it's been an open question in my mind why doing, aside from it being part of a Zero event, one of the platforms that the Zero event group looked at, I don't know anybody using it. And I actually graduated from Full Sail. So I've had my eye, like on a personal level, like I lived in it, I lived there, I went to school there, thinking that it was a great platform and just wondering why I'm not hearing more about it. But I do think North America being so Oculus dominated and being just a different marketplace altogether, and living now on the other side of the world, VR has gotten big enough that now we have regional divisions, which is pleasant because before everybody was using the American platforms, but now it's not quite that way.
Speaking of particular headsets, so do both of these platforms function on all headsets? Do they function on laptops? Which kinds? For anyone who's not used them before?
So I know that Rumii works on pretty much everything.
Altspace.
Altspace, it doesn't work on mobile anymore. I don't know about Rumii working on mobile, but I have a feeling mobile is mostly being figured out.
Let's not talk about mobile very much.
It's got a nice promise of being like, that's, I think for all of us, well, certainly for me, the dream is that we have people in a VR headset at one end of it and someone else is able to hop in on their mobile phone, and everyone in this wonderful equal world is able to do whatever they want all the time.
Accessibility, like you said.
I think
because Rosie, you said you've been using this for your work a lot, right? You've been doing meetings and things like that.
Yeah, so kind of like Michael, you know, we're kind of more interested in what we can use to actually use it to create things, because obviously right now all of our regular production with, you know, in-person filming, we just obviously had, it was quite freeing in a way, because I tend to go off on flights of fancy a little bit with ideas. So it was quite nice to just have a line drawn, say, right, we can't do normal filming anymore. That's just off the table. So that video that we made, Mark, who's also on our team, he was at home on his desktop and recording OBS. So like nothing in that was usable from the headset. You know, it just looks rubbish when you're doing even if you try and sit very, very still to record something, you get in the rubbish little square and everything, you're pulling it straight out of a headset. So we were really exploring Altspace from that point of view, of being able to kind of create some interesting podcasts, you know, stuff, but with a bit more interest to it. And, you know, just using some of the options that make that really high production values, actually, because if you're coming from outside of VR world, I think all of us can get a little bit blasé about it. Like someone mentioned something about it all looking a bit low poly. And like, for most people, like, if they haven't tried VR before, they put on a headset and go into Altspace, and I high-fived my brother. He lives in Edinburgh. He's never been in Altspace before, but he's got an Oculus Go. And, you know, I'm like, this is insane. Like, stop for a second and really think about what's going on right now. Yeah. It's mad. And I was saying this with Michael earlier, you know, you can get so carried away with, you know, the next step of what you really want next, and like taking a pause and going, this is incredible right now.
Yeah, it almost feels like people in the industry are racing so quickly forward, and really we have to think about the fact that most people don't know or understand. And that was also like kind of the point of doing this is, you know, we need to get different perspectives. We need to have like a different way for people to access this information and understand how the professionals are using it, but what's the easiest way to get into it. Like we have a question here that is, again, it's a pretty like, that's a pretty specific question for an industry person, but says, so it says, it's directed towards Michael. It says, I'm also very interested in the potential for collaboration in VR, specifically to co-create assets over and above verbal discussions. It seems to me quite difficult to do this at the moment in an easy way. I like the Google Poly Rumii plugin, but I wonder if you or anyone in the room knows of any way of creating 3D objects within the space using standard physics models and formats for object creation, rather than importing and doing only basic adjustments. And that's like the next step stuff, I think.
Well, I mean, so I might be missing the specific meaning of the standard physics models, because I don't know what that might mean. If you mean like the physics engine of that platform looking realistic, like conforming to what we would expect a physical object to behave like. But what you're describing is user content tools, which you do see more and more on the social VR platforms, which are, I guess, and this is a terminology thing. I mean, I kind of think social VR is broad. I think collaboration is inherently social, so it falls into that category. But I think, Asha, you shared this this graphic in your last webinar, like the different platforms kind of in different headings.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it was interesting to see how there was a grouping of like Neos VR and Rec Room and Altspace being in the social VR area. And some of them have user content creation and others don't. Like in Rec Room, for example, which is a different platform that we're not discussing here, but that's a platform that is really leaning into user content creation. It's a little held back by the aesthetics of the platform, and that some people don't care for that aesthetic. But the collaborative content creation is very high there. But you also see things like the Wild, for example, which I saw an incredible demo. I would love to talk to anyone who's actually used it, because I'm really excited by what I saw. You saw people collaboratively building a space, you know, pulling in assets, creating simple shapes and simple objects, and then even doing it at different scales, which practically, I don't know how that would actually be productive, but it's impressive to see somebody building the house while I'm building a room in the house, you know, for example. So there are platforms that have the ability to create objects dynamically of varying degrees of fidelity and to do so collaboratively. There are platforms now that have that.
Nice.
Can I add something to that?
Go for it, yeah.
Like Tony was saying, that we're very much at the early stages of this journey, especially in collaborative VR. and the acceleration now because of COVID-19 of everybody wanting to collaborate, that's exciting. I have a feeling we might see one platform doing this really well and another platform doing that really well. And then 6 months later, they'll kind of, well, I'll borrow that. And at some point, platforms will emerge that are delivering the right combination of tools for that use case. And like a quote unquote, a winner will emerge where they're just offering it at the right, we have to find out, like hardly anything's being monetized in social VR. And that's going to come as well. And when you can't monetize until you've got something people want to pay for. So everybody's looking, well, people want that, let's integrate that. I think that's one thing we'll find. And then the next thing, hopefully, I'm hoping, if 5G comes and processing power on the headsets improves, that we can use, web VR or WebXR as a standard. All of those features and developers, it won't be such a closed wall garden. That's what I'm hoping. And then we were having, before this webinar, we were having a chat about being able to port from one platform to another. If all that goes to WebVR, it's just a URL, and you just click into that thing, or you take down that bit of code into here. So I think the next 5 years is going to be super exciting.
That's a great lead on. And Tony, I would love your comments on what Daniel just said, but we also just got asked, like, what panelists think is missing from the platforms from Altspace and Rumii. Go for it, Tony.
This ties into actually what I was about to say, just from the educator perspective. Each educational institution essentially has their own learning management system, LMS. And that's basically how the students interface with the class. Whether it's a distance course, they're typically more robust. An in-residence course, it's really just a download and turn in assignments. But because those LMSs are so important in the education process, essentially once our VR content is able to plug into the LMS, now you can see where an LMS will plug into Microsoft Office, and you can go seamlessly from your class version of the LMS to some content that's in a different platform. When it gets to the point that I, as a student, am in my LMS for my class, and there's some VR content, I can click the button and put the headset on, and it's seamless. When we do that, I think the number of users will drastically improve, and because the universities or school systems at that point actually become primary customers to the social VR environments. I think that's going to add to the ability to monetize, like you were talking about, Daniel, because there needs to be a level of investment to sustain it, because it's pretty expensive to run one of these social VR options, and you can only sustain as a free only option for so long, that at some point there's got to be some revenues to pay for the staff and the development, all of those things. And so education, I think, is one of the key markets that as it expands, as the technology gets better to actually run it as a plug-in, that'll be great for social VR.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Go for it, Rosie.
So I think similarly to Michael, the content creation side of things, like virtual cameras, making that side of things much more intuitive. Like, that was my first thought when I went in there, was we can't do regular productions. We're already looking at all sorts of different remote options of doing mocap using iPhones and creating 3D models of actors, so that we can kind of keep using kind of virtual production tools in that sense. But there's such an opportunity with things like Altspace or all of these platforms to actually do creative work. And I think there's obviously tons of stuff being done with more formal learning, which is brilliant. It's infinitely more engaging, and I'm super on board with that. But I think there's also kind of creating narrative content. Like, you can make, I'm trying to work on making like a documentary in Altspace at the moment, because we can have a nature documentary where the presenter just goes, bang, now I'm in the middle of Gabon, bang, now I'm on the moon, because this is referencing my brother, who's a space scientist who also flies around the world. Well, currently can't fly around the world, talking about nature's wonders. So it's a brilliant way to kind of add much more creative approaches to talking about things that at the moment we're massively limited. Even the big broadcasters at the moment, they're not really going much beyond, finding clever ways to make some things move between different Zoom screens, so that's like, we've done something wacky during lockdown. And I think we're not being anywhere near ambitious enough. I'm quite surprised actually that we haven't seen more you know, interesting creative things going out of it, but I think because it is not frictionless, you know, it took us to do that little 2-minute video, which in my head was going to be plonk a virtual camera down, record it all, chop it up and be done. As it was, Mark had to log in through the desktop, do an OBS recording. We had to go all the way back to traditional camera techniques where we had like a virtual slate and scene, shot, take, so that I could go back in and find, and it was just like, it was all a bit of a nightmare. I was like, I just want to be able to put a virtual camera where I want it and it record it. I don't want to see a character and have to be using the POV of the character. That seems to me in Altspace like one gap where I don't quite get why there can't be a virtual camera without a character attached to it.
Funnily enough, like that's actually what happened to us with the HTC event and Engage. We actually do the 2D version that goes on YouTube, actually took like a full-blown like regular type of like film production with a whole other team. And then, you know, that was it was incredible actually. We actually really underestimated how many people it took to run.
We're trying to work out what virtual production needs to look like, and it's like, well, actually, you need a sound man. The first time we did it, the sound cut out, but because Mark was trying to monitor that, he didn't notice that, and like, it's all of these things that you assume will be more straightforward with VR and with digital, like microphone. It's you actually need more people than you would think. It's not quite as straightforward necessarily to do a good level production. Like you can grab stuff, but it's,
which goes to your point earlier of saying like, wasn't the point of this to make it like cheaper and less people and more efficient? And, you know, I guess the tools that need to come out to make that happen are going to be really important.
Yeah, it's just very
I think now people are learning that, you know, this is the thing. Developers said, I see this as a use case, but no one was really using it on the scale and with the frequency of iteration that they're doing it now. So now people are testing these hypotheses and saying, all right, the camera's essential, because the people don't care as much about the live event. They care about the 2D documentation, which is going to last long after that and be experienced by many more. So, you know, there's so many things being tested. So to you know, the question I think we've all touched on, and Daniel I think had it right, that right now one platform does X very well and another platform does Y. And 6 months later they may flip-flop because they copy each other and they don't have the legacy of previous development that wasn't that great that they're still carrying around with them. The new functionality is just boom, we saw it tested and this thing we do better. So I think, for example, content creation tools, the ability to create, but that's really complex. So if you go into Rec Room and you think, for example, Rec Room is this great children's game, you open up that Maker Pen and it's going to blow your mind how much you have to understand to make something. And other platforms, I think, similarly. The other thing is screen sharing versus triggering website, like triggering some type of embedded browser. So we didn't talk about it so much, but in Altspace and Engage, for example, these are two platforms, and I think many platforms do it similarly, where everyone's going to watch a video or a link, but it depends on their own device when that link starts, or, you know, all these other things. And so, I mean, my colleague Lance, you know, just doing this event on Friday, there was a big, you know, 80-person Altspace event, and he took it for granted. Maybe a third of the room couldn't see the video. You just take it for granted that, you know, and one thing that Altspace has, which we didn't mention, which is really great from again, an audience perspective compared to some other platforms like Engage, which Engage should have this. When you're there and you're muted, because there's a lot of you and you shouldn't be talking, in Altspace, you can trigger emoticons. You can express yourself without disrupting, in an audio sense, it
comes up with like a thought bubble, right? With the emoji.
It's you get feedback as a speaker without it disrupting you. Engage, for example, it would be great if Engage had something like that.
Does Rumii have something like that?
Yes.
As you can see right here.
The thumbs up.
It's almost
great.
identical.
You know, it's really important. Rec Room right now is bringing in screen sharing. They haven't announced it yet, but you know, they showed it off kind of in an early stage demo. But if you look at Big Screen does a completely different approach, where it's not like we're all going to watch the same video and it's going to trigger at different times, and I don't know if you're seeing it, or I don't know if you're 5 seconds behind me or 30 seconds behind me. In Big Screen, you're actually streaming your desktop, and so Big Screen will tell you at your bandwidth. We don't suggest more than 6 people 8 people.
Cool.
5G is
Interesting.
obviously going to change that. Now suddenly I could stream. But then once we have 5G, why am I running it on my computer anyway? Why is this not a cloud desktop that I'm interacting with? So I mean, definitely, Daniel, you hit it on the head that, you know, the next 5 years are going to be really exciting. You know, and as Tony said, we're early in this period of consumer, like, and I would say large scale. We're still talking, I mean, a few million is still small, but a few million is not that small. I mean, really, I mean, it's supporting an industry. So there's so many things that are being learned in the last few years, and the last 3 months probably have accelerated that learning, you know, more than any other period.
I have a question on, because on your point about like things being more accessible, people wanting the 2D content, and Rosie, as you've done and I've done, and Daniel, you did it with your events as well to try and reach a much bigger audience as possible. How easy is it to live stream off of both of these platforms then?
I would say that
To a 2D platform.
OBS is a go-to tool. Usually what we do is go into the platform with a second account.
Okay.
So if I'm doing an event in Altspace or in Rumii or in Engage, I'll go in with my headset, my main account, come in with a second account on a different email. That'll be my camera that I'm recording on my second laptop or wherever as OBS. That can work, but unless somebody's very skilled at operating the movement in that platform, it ends up being a static picture. And it's so it's not only is it flat, but it's static, which is a million miles from VR. I mean, it's kind, you could essentially, mostly I just listen to it. I don't watch it because there's nothing there. It's like a tiny little avatars moving around. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah,
Tony, go for it.
Go on, Tony.
I was going to say, along with that, a lot of these platforms give users the option to just log in via PC so that they're present in the virtual environment as an avatar.
Yeah.
And I've always told, when the students ask about that perspective, I always say, well, my thought about that is using a PC inside multi-user VR is like dancing without music. You know,
but at the same time,
but it's a great way to get more people involved. So,
exactly. It's for me, it's a valid tool for bringing people to the threshold.
That's right.
Like they may not have the device, but if they get a good enough experience in 2D, then they think, oh well, you know, starting to get it here. It's a
Incidentally, Daniel, the point that you were describing just there is one of the tools we used in the class. When we would have two instructors, one would actually operate via PC like you were describing, and because it had an operator who was fully moving around, he could pan around and get different shots and add that dimension
close up. And that helps a lot.
Tony, you would do that in Rumii for your classes?
Yeah, for our classes.
Oh, interesting. And then where would you live stream them, to YouTube or something?
Versus live streaming my headset, because when you think about your headset, as much as you may not think about it, but as you're looking around, that's causing the user's brain.
Yeah.
The more head movement you've got, how quickly you can make the viewer seem almost nauseous just from watching the flat screen version of it.
Yeah.
So if you use a PC as the camera person, then you've got a very much more stable platform so that when you pan around, it's done at the, you know, mouse cursor or left, right button.
I wanted to bring up another point, going back to the previous point about how things are evolving. Michael was saying that we're going to see platforms developing, like Rec Room has a great ability to create, whereas maybe Altspace doesn't yet. I think the developers on most of these teams, they have the skills and the ability to do that. But up until recently, the level of investment and attention that these platforms have been getting have just meant that whilst it's technically been possible, and probably the people on the teams have the skills, they just haven't had the remit or the budget to do it. What I hope now is with so much focus coming, more developers getting into it, maybe that'll accelerate as well.
And we just had another question here about, could there be new film and TV industry roles like VR cinematographer and directors?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what was very interesting, what Tony was saying about moving the cameras around and stuff. Like, we've been trying to use all of these platforms. That's why we've been looking at hubs and Altspace, all the different ones, just trying them out and seeing what elements work for different things. But one thing that, like I said, has become very, very clear is that there's this assumption we can just rush through. And this is the same always with production is, oh, it's digital, we can fix it in post. We don't need as many people, it's easy. And it's like, it's not just about the tools, you know, it's about having the right people who actually know how to make great stuff out of it. And when it comes to cinematography and lighting, this is why we were excited about Altspace, is we can create complete sets. Like what we're looking at is we can create a whole set, we can bring our actors in, we can block stuff out, we can try it, we can light it, but that requires specific tools. So I would like to be able to change between different lenses, for example, because at the moment everything's one big wide lens, which is not at all how I would normally shoot something as like a regular film director. And I think that's where actually I think it's a really good thing, because there's this assumption of like, oh, well, I can do this. I've got VR, I can be a cameraman. And it's like, well, no, actually, this is a thing that has always been an issue in the industry. The worst thing you can say to a cameraman is, oh, your camera's really good at like filming stuff. And it's like, no, it's the best possible way to upset somebody. And so with this, like everything, like you can see in the shot behind Tony, the default stuff is big, broad lighting, you know, everything's a light and stuff. And it's like, that's incredibly dull from a, you know, creative perspective. And I think 100%, this, like right now, it's going to be a very long time till we can get back to big crews on sets, on location. Like there are so many issues related to COVID with that. And like how long it's going to be before people are going to commission something to actually then, it's just, you know,
on that comment about lighting though, that's a really interesting point. Like, do you think functionality in platforms where you could actually like change the lighting and do more set design?
It's in demand on a lot of platforms.
It's happening, but like these guys said, you know, there just hasn't been a demand, because generally there are industry tools. You know, there's something called CineTracer, which is kind of a 3D modeling tool where you've got all the cameras and the lights and things like that. But that already exists, and it costs about 50 quid for a bit of software. But from my point of view, the collaboration tool of this is me being able to get in actors, even if they're on a desktop, put them around, try stuff out, see how big the set needs to be, like being able to try out all of these basic things that normally take a lot of time and money, and be like, in an afternoon, we can try out 100 variations on this, which is amazing, you know, from a creative perspective to be able to try that out. But that requires directors, cinematographers, cameramen, and it requires those people and those people's skills. And right now, what I'm excited about is I can see a lot of friends who are freelancers who are just not going to be able to work in their traditional roles for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so this is like a brilliant time. Like virtual production has been a big thing for a long while. I don't know if you've watched the behind the scenes of how the Lion King recent movie was made.
Oh my God, I'm such a fangirl. I love that video.
It's so exciting, that stuff. And it's like, this is a whole new
Can I
over.
just jump in? I totally agree with you that, like with any disruption, people's jobs on one level will fall away, but others will take the place. And we're talking about creating production from virtual reality to present on a 2D screen.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother layer there where you're creating production in VR for VR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the next layer.
That I think we've barely scratched the surface.
I think that's exactly the point. We haven't got people from other industries in yet as well.
Yeah.
I think, you know, bringing in directors who haven't tried this stuff, their minds are like, are you serious? We could do this thing. And I think you can get, what I've really realized through all of what we've been doing recently is trying to look at stuff afresh as if I was just a photographer or director without having spent the last 5 years kind of exploring this. And when you look at it with fresh eyes and you see what's possible, you're like, this is astounding. You know?
I actually have a quick question. Are you able to do spatial recordings in Altspace and Rumii right now? Yeah. Like for VR? Like can you?
I haven't tried.
Spatial recordings in Rumii?
Meaning like you can do the recording in VR and then play it back in VR, kind of like Engage. Can you do that?
That would be brilliant.
Engage.
I mean, to my knowledge, in Altspace, you can't do that.
I don't think.
There's platforms that feature that, I think.
Yeah, there's Engage, and I think this morning I read that there's another known platform that is now doing that, but I can't.
Rec Room has it a little bit. It has it for you as an individual, for like a finite amount of seconds. And then I heard that Glue used to have it.
That's it.
Took it out, gonna work on it, and are gonna re-release it.
I read it was Glue. It was Glue saying And in fact, it was on the XR crowd WhatsApp that I read that today.
That was one of our discoveries, because that's the thing I think that, to talk about another platform, Engage, like, again, what they do well, like that's their value proposition for right now, and they can't sit on their laurels, because other platforms are going to recognize, hey, that's like, if I want to, going back to making VR content for VR consumption, that's exactly what spatial recording allows you to do. So maybe some of us have played things like Invisible Hours, which is like a theater production. It's a full play with like 10 characters that are all in real time, but you get to explore it, control time, go around it. You explore an entire animated 2-3 hour production. And it's really great. I mean, that's Tequila. I think Tequila Works, great studio. And that's the kind of thing that Engage in theory exactly could do. It doesn't have to be events. They could do performance. They could do plays. And I know some other people, even in Istanbul in Norway, a studio called Glitch that was working on VR live theater productions. Which in theory could be, I believe the idea was also to record it, to make it accessible at another time, so you still have the sense of, spatial performance.
Well, guys, this has been such an amazing discussion. I hate to cut it off. I know we're kind of like running over time here. So I'm just maybe like, I'll wrap up with like a last maybe comment on the platform that you use, what you love about it and think it's best for, maybe the thing you'd love to see happen to it to make it level up, and for your purposes. And yeah, so just go a quick round robin, just your last final thoughts before we end. Daniel, you want to start?
Last thoughts. Bring on WebXR with a vengeance. But in the meantime, all the work, all the different platforms are doing, and groups like XR Crowd, it's just exciting times to be exploring together. I love this journey we're all on, and can't wait to see where it goes next.
Great. Tony?
From a technical perspective, I would like to see a more intuitive interface. Right now, you take your controller and you point at letters, and it's very difficult to move forward with that. But something that's more intuitive will be great. But from a big picture level, as one of the things that Rosie kind of read into, the arts. We've talked about STEM in the past, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think it needs to be STEAM, and some places we're already doing that, because the arts are going to be a huge demand in using VR and AR. So in terms of set design, lighting, art, that's backgrounds, and those things that aren't usually known to be run by computer program kind of people, those are the things that are going to be really, really important for immersive environments.
Nice. Thanks, Tony. Rosie?
I mean, what Tony said, basically, I think it's very clear that there are certain platforms that are designed, they're technically very good, it's all very clean, the user interface is pretty good, but like it lacks soul, it lacks the artistic side of things. And just because someone technically is able to do a particular, whatever they need to be done to build that set, there's a big difference between something that's technically good and something that actually really brings it to life and turns it into something that sort of stirs your soul, which I think is what VR has such an amazing possibility to do. And some of these things just leave me a little bit cold. And I think that we're right on the verge now. It's like, if we can bring those people in, and that arts meets science, meets STEM, meets all of that, that's where I think the most exciting possibility is with VR. Exactly right, Daniel. It's that.
Yeah. Michael, any final thoughts?
Yeah, this is a great opportunity in a very difficult time. But for this particular industry, for the people who work really hard to create these type of experiences, I was concerned a few months ago that I was seeing the building of a hype cycle. And for those who went through like the 2015 and 16 hype cycle and then the crash, particularly in some smaller markets where, I was hearing regularly people telling me in 2017 and 18, VR failed, it's dead, it will not exist in 2 years, period. And I was hearing 19-year-olds saying this, I was hearing 35 and 50-year-olds saying that. It was a general perception, AR is going to be king, VR will not exist anymore in a matter of months or years. And, and because that was how much the expectations were raised, and some of the communication was just not very accurate or effective communication. Experiences were great, communication was not. And this is really an important time, that when we are developing, when we're sharing our excitement, that I think we always have to temper that excitement, because as I think everybody here acknowledged, like, until you put someone in VR, you know, they have these ideas from many, you know, unlike some technologies, like VR is a sci-fi concept. We've all experienced it.
Mm.
So it's always about, I feel like it's important to always check our excitement, say, yeah, but, you know, it's maybe, you know, friction's a bit high, or maybe it's not quite capturing the warmth of an experience, no matter how much effort we put into it. Something's holding it back. It's still great, but we just need to always communicate with authenticity about our experience, and maybe not as much our excitement.
Well, that is why I really appreciate having all of you here. I mean, getting perspectives from educators, producers, researchers, all in one forum, and getting honest user feedback on these platforms, I think is really, really important, and a way for, you know, all of this stuff to grow, and, you know, to help people have an easier access maybe, or understanding before they kind of start their journey exploring this stuff. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I really appreciate all your insight, and like giving us all your tacit knowledge that we can't find any other way. So we have this recorded. It'll be available on the Emerge UK website very shortly. Please share it with anyone who is interested in understanding more about these platforms, and feel free to reach out to us, you guys, if you have any further questions.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy meeting you guys and listening.
Yeah, thanks guys. Take care.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.